Well, thanks everyone for being so patient with us. Thank you for joining our session. My name is Jully Kim. I'm the Director of Engineering Programs at Zendesk out of San Francisco. And this is my co-presenter.
Hi guys, I'm Diep. I'm out in Pasadena, California. I'm a Senior Manager for Agile Excellence team.
And thanks again for being patient. We're all Agilists here, so we're going to figure this out together. Our session is talking about influence from the trenches. We often don't have the luxury of figuring out, of being the CEO of our own company and mandating that everyone needs to do something. And a lot of Agile leadership happens from being a person of influence, figuring out something that you want to communicate to someone else. But how do you do that if you don't necessarily have budget, money, or title? And some of the things that we want to share with you today are around these things, around this concept. The idea that influence isn't such a mystical or vague sort of topic that's out there, but it's actually a really practical and strategic practice that you can actually learn and grow in your skill set. So we'll talk about some of these things. What are the components of influence and why does it matter? Understanding the qualities of competence and trustworthiness. We'll talk about those two as being sort of centralized characteristics of influence. Other tips and tricks to increase these things, and we'll have some group discussion and activity together. And ultimately, how do you grow your circle of influence to make a greater impact in your workplace? Next slide.
So let me see a raise of hand. How many of you guys feel you guys are influencers right now? Okay, great. So hopefully by the end of the sessions, I'd like you guys to all raise your hands because we're all influenced to some degree, right? Whether it's at a workplace or at home. So why does influence matter, right? So,
got to be influenced at home. I got to influence my husband to go on vacation.
Yeah, no, seriously, right? Because my 8-year-old influenced me all the time. He's always asking me to, hey, Dad, I want to buy Roblox so I can play this virtual game and this virtual monetary stuff. So I'm like, so he always trying to influence me in certain ways, right? So he can get what he wants, right? So I mean, why influence is important so we can make an impact, whether it's at work, at home. In my case, my son. Helping others, convincing them, right? Some of the elements of that, whether like I'm in Boy Scout and PTA and all that good stuff, right? So we're always looking for ways to influence people to volunteer and participate. And how do you do that, right? So we're going to explore some of the elements of how do you become a better influencer in this case. Like some of the YouTubers now, right? They're the huge influencers. They're actually making a career out of it. You know, 5 years ago, you wouldn't see people wanted to be a career path. Now you see a lot of kids I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up. I'm like, you want to just show videos and stuff? I'm like, all right. But that's kind of the society that we're moving towards right now, right? And then if you have something unique to say, right? So that way that you can influence people to see your perspective. So we're going to be talking about some of these things in the next few slides here. So I want to kind of introduce you, and some of you may already know if you're in the Agile industry for a while. So Shuhari, it's a Japanese martial art learning practice, right? So it's like, think about it as riding a bike, right? You start off with shu. You're trying to learn the balance of things, right? Learning the techniques before you start, taking off the training wheels, learning some of the principles and concentrating on the task without worrying too much about the underlying theory, right? So as a kid, when I teach my son, he has the training wheels, and then I kind of take off one training wheels kind of so he can feel the balance of it. So once he learns that, right? And then you go to the ha. So you're learning the principles and the techniques about it, and then you can take out the training wheels. I'm not expecting to be an ex-gamer, BMXer, right, at the beginning of the shoe. But at the end, once you master all that, then you go to the re, which is, now you're kind of creating your own techniques and approaches to how to, whether it's riding bikes or agile principles or practices. So we're going to these kind of the learning paths of how do you become a kind of a strong influencer in our case, right? Whether it's at work or at home. So kind of just through the various learning stages. So we're going to explore some of these techniques and the basic concept of it, and then eventually, the more you practice, the more you understand these concepts. Eventually, you kind of become creating your own influencing framework and techniques and whatnot to build upon that, right?
So we're actually going to do an exercise that we'll use throughout the course of this session together and do a quick activity. So we're going to actually pair up, and we've got our famous Yelp sign here. But I want you to spend a few moments to try to influence your partner to try out your favorite restaurant, right? What do you like about it? What do you find super awesome about this particular place? Why is it awesome for the person that you're speaking with? So we'll spend a few moments doing that, and this activity will carry us through the rest of our session. So if you haven't already, because of our IT snafu this morning, introduce yourself to a partner and spend a few minutes trying to first identify your favorite restaurant if you can pick one, and then influence each other about why you should try that restaurant out.
You gotta remind him to switch.
Yeah. I'm gonna walk around a little.
Yeah.
I like it because it's kid friendly. It's very kind of loud.
It's a good turnout.
Yeah. And make sure the other pair has a chance.
Switch partners so they can influence you.
If you haven't already, make sure that the pair has a chance to switch. Fantastic. If you haven't already, make sure your pair has a chance to switch. Go back and forth. Pardon me, I'm going to slide right by you. Who's doing which one?
Yeah, actually because of this too.
Do you want me to just finish out this session? Okay. Okay. If you can hear my voice, please raise your hand. If you can hear my voice, please raise your hand. Fantastic. There's such a lively conversation. Mostly, if you can hear my voice, please raise your hand. Thank you.
So who's hungry now?
Everyone loves talking about food, my favorite topic as well. So we're going to continue this exercise. You'll find some Post-its and Sharpies, possibly, or pens on your table. I'd love for us to think about, by yourself, without discussing with your group, what are aspects of the other person's communication that helped you feel convinced or influenced to try out that person's restaurant? One idea per sticky, and we'll spend maybe just 1 or 2 minutes really rapidly writing our thoughts through all the reasons why you felt compelled or convinced or influenced to consider trying this other person's restaurant.
You said one per sticky?
One idea per sticky. You should have a bunch of stickies on your, if you need more, let us know. We can happily share those.
Next few are yours.
Okay. So each table should generate about 50 stickies. All the reasons.
We only gave you guys 25, so.
One idea per sticky. Yeah, perfect. One idea per sticky. all the
limit,
reasons
whip
why
limit.
you felt compelled or influenced to consider trying out your partner's restaurant. I love it. I love all these ideas that are coming out. All right, I hear some pens slowing down, so we'll continue. But feel free to continue writing your thoughts as you think of them throughout the course of the session. We'll come back to using these stickies for the second half of our presentation. So we're going to stop for a second to think about the concept of influence. And if you can think about how we can break down each component of influence and sort of build on each of those, then maybe we can actually, in some, become better influencers. Yeah, influence the remote. So Amy Cuddy, she is the author of Presence, which is a fantastic book that I absolutely recommend. She's a social psychologist and Harvard business professor. So there's two qualities that you can determine about a person as soon as you meet them, which is pretty amazing, right? As soon as you meet somebody, you can determine these two qualities. One, can I respect this person? Which has correlations to competence. And can I trust this person? And has their correlations to trustworthiness. And there's actually a lot of research on competence and trustworthiness that's sort of out there in the field that has to do with salespeople and teaching and parenting. And we'd like to sort of augment and apply this rubric to influence and thinking about how these components of competence and trustworthiness actually can help us become better influencers. Influence the remote. All right, so let's get to the root of what these words mean. So I think that's really important so that we actually all clear and level setting on what is it that we're actually talking about. And typically I would put a definition from Merriam-Webster, but that's probably too archaic now. So dictionary.com is going to do us good right now. Competence is having suitable or sufficient skill, knowledge, or expertise for some purpose. That means they're properly qualified. It's a skill level that we're talking about.
Properly qualified in what they're trying to do.
Yes, in what they're trying to, the competence area that they're looking at, right? What is it that they have skill in? And then the trustworthy piece has the reliance on the integrity, ability, and surety of a person or a thing, the character of the person. And we heard a little bit about that from Allison Levine, about both having the skill, the ego, and then also the ego for the team. This is the trustworthiness of a person. So there's lots of sort of like correlations to what we're hearing again here. And these two definitions are something that we're going to sort of dive into over the course of this session. Maybe if I just click at Dan, this will work.
That's actually the last. I'm trustworthy.
And so ultimately, what does it mean to influence from our trenches, right? We're not always in a position of being a CEO or some C-level class, but we have really important things to say. We want to rally people together to help us advance our cause. And so this idea from the trenches, of like from the sidelines, of like being in the thick of it, how do we influence from that position? So Dan's going to share with us a little bit about competence. Dan.
I guess I don't need to control it. So there's two core, these are kind of the elements of the two core components that Jully was mentioning, right? Competence and trustworthy. So competence has personal conviction, direct experience. If you don't have direct experience, sometimes borrow experience. And then Jully's going to kind of cover a little bit more details about the trustworthiness. So the next slide here, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of personal competency, right? So personal conviction. So as you get through the Yelp exercises, I'm sure some of you guys were probably more enthusiastic about your recommendations to certain restaurants, right? Your personal conviction of how good the restaurant is, right? So can you imagine if you're like, I recommend go to this Mexican place. It's okay, you know. You're not gonna, exude conviction, right? I'm like, I don't know, I want to try that. It sounds like I'm probably Yelping myself or something. But yeah, personal conviction is a huge thing, right? I mean, in terms of whether you influence someone, like for my instance, right, at OpenX right now, my personal convictions, I truly believe in servant leadership, right? And so my personal conviction is bringing in certified Agile Leader course and whatnot, so that we can further build out the Agile leaders within the organizations during Agile transformation. So I was able to influence my CTO to get the budget to bring in those classes, right? And so it's those personal convictions that you have that actually, they can actually feel the sense of enthusiasm that you have when you're trying to convince somebody of doing something. And then direct experience, right? Whether it's personal experience yourself that you experience that you can use that as an example to demonstrate that why you're recommending or trying to influence them to do X. Personally, because I've done a few Agile transformations in the past, I know that core leadership is actually critical to Agile transformation, whether it's top-down or bottoms-up. But in either case, right, whether it's middle management and whatnot, so I was able to relate that direct experience to influence my CTO to get us the budget to get the training. And then if you don't have it, borrow experience, right? Read up case studies, whether it's books. In this case, we actually borrow Amy Cuddy's core components, right, of competency and trustworthiness in terms of the borrow experience and leveraging that in our case here. So there's a number of ways that you can leverage this to do influence others, right? And then Julie's going to cover some of the more trustworthy elements.
Yeah, I would also add one more piece about borrowed experience. Even things like, this should feel fairly common, right? Like when we're actually doing a Yelp exercise or when we're looking for a new job, we borrow other people's experience and how they experience a restaurant or something like Glassdoor to understand other people's experience to get a sense of how we're doing or like how we can benefit from their experience. And so many times when I'm coaching individuals who are sort of earlier in their careers, they're like, I really want to do this Agile transformation, but I actually don't have experience. Then I ask them, read up on other experiences. What are best practices? What do other companies, your size, your market, your maturity, do blog posts, books, to help you gain sort of that borrowed experience and bring credibility for your competence that you might not have on your own. Okay. So trustworthiness is also one of those like really fuzzy, sometimes like hard things to really describe, but this is something that Dan and I have been thinking about for a while in terms of what actually can help build trustworthiness. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but some things that we've sort of experienced. And there's a lot of content here, so I wrote it down on a sticky, so I'm going to read off some of these. So again, the personal relationship aspect is super important, right? The recommendation from my best friend about a restaurant is going to be much more open to me as opposed to a recommendation that I just read on Yelp, right? So having a personal relationship, this is like one-on-one coffees, this is like 24-hour turnarounds on email and Slack, this is like making sure you say good morning, this is like the personal connection and making sure that you're actually figuring out what's important to that person. You might have actually had this conversation where in previous sessions that we've done, individuals will first ask, well, do you have any food allergies? What do you prefer? And given all of the range of things that all of my favorite restaurants, which I can't pick one of, I can hone it to figure out what's the best application for the person that I'm communicating with. So the next one has to do with body language, facial expressions, body movements, postures, gestures, eye contact, touch, space, voice. These are all things that we know as super valuable to build trustworthiness, right? So I had a situation where a team lead during a stand-up with his arms crossed, sitting at the back corner, says, sure, I'm available for code reviews if you need my help, you know, and sort of in his own words. And fortunately, I just happen to know this team lead, and he's actually quite genuine in his approach, and he was actually quite honest that he was available to support the team with regards to code reviews and sort of pushing along their code. But everybody else in that room who was observing his body language would not have known that to be the case. And as you can imagine, probably nobody reached out to him for support. So the body language, even though it's really minor, it's actually a huge component in building trustworthiness, right? Point your toes to the person you're speaking at, open your shoulders, and in that way, building a one-on-one, ultimately personal relationship. So the Center for Body Language, they categorize lots of different kinds of body language. That's super helpful. It's actually voting season right now, so you might see a ton of politicians doing this. And apparently, this box that's right in front of you with open hands is supposed to build confidence of having a trustworthy pose. Now, I'm not saying be a clown and sort of like do that in like a manipulative way, but if you think about it as a strategy, the face-forward openness is really giving signals to people that you're communicating with that you are actually really trustworthy and want to communicate something important to them. Proximity has to do with Generally, and this is really true in relationships, right? Like, when I was dating my husband, we had a long-term relationship for a while, and we couldn't wait to be together, right? And so the proximity of being close and having communications in person is the best. Of course, that's the best. Now, we often work in distributed offices, and that's not always possible. Second best is video conferencing, right? And then it's audio, and then it's Slack, and then it's email. And it just sort of like goes down the hierarchy, right? And this has to do with sort of the Albert McGrabian rule. 55% of your communication is your body language. 37% is your tone and like how you speak. And only 7%, less than 10%, single-digit percent is actually the message that gets across. Shocking, right? When I discovered this, I was like, this is why email is so terrible. Like, I cannot communicate if only people are reading through email. Only 7% of what I'm trying to communicate actually gets across. So if you think about the proximity of having in person, sort of reading the cues, and then also having the audio if you don't, and audio and visual if you aren't able to be in person, benefits in terms of building a trustworthy relationship. There's also the frequency, the familiarity principle. This has to do with ads. People merely develop a preference for things just because they're familiar with it, right? So you get all the ads that follow you, so that even if you're not interested in a Lexus, maybe one day you might, and then you're like, oh, actually, I want a Lexus, right? So it's this frequency principle that we can actually benefit from when we're trying to build a trustworthy relationship, right? So it's, hey, I just want to check in with you and see if there's anything I can help you with every week, every month. And then when you actually have something to say and convince or influence an important person, you've already built a relationship that it's not ice cold, right? They already know that the familiarity of connecting with you and bumping into you and understanding your message and who you are and how you're trying to communicate is really going to build that credibility for trustworthiness. And this last one has to do with integrity, is really your faithfulness in the small things proves that you can be faithful in the big things, right? So oftentimes, we're looking at transformations of trying to convince people to do things. Otherwise, why would we be here, right? We would have already done it, right? If it's easy to influence, we'd have already figured out how to do it, and we'd all be pros anyways. But oftentimes, we're convincing people to do or influencing people to do things that are hard. And change management is difficult for people who've got long histories of doing something the same way. But as you think about integrity, of being faithful in doing the small things, hey, I asked you to do this, quick, action item, done, and get back to you really quickly. Or this small project, done, accomplished, I finished my goal. Building up sort of that credibility of being faithful in small things, when it comes time to ask for something that's like, hey, we're going to try adding a retrospective where we all talk about what's happened. Like that credibility of, hey, I'm not sure about this thing, but I know you, and you're trying to do something good for our team, so I'm going to go and risk something for you. And so building that sort of integrity over time is really valuable, as well as thinking about and ultimately the test of integrity is what people say about you when you're not there, right? And thinking about, as you're trying to influence someone on the back channels, can you believe that Jully actually said that we're going to try this ridiculous thing? As you know, like, what do people actually say about this? Or in the back channel says, Jully is trying to make us do this crazy thing, but I know you might not all agree, but I think we should try it. I think this is good for our team. So what are people saying about you sort of in the back channels when you're not there? That's the integrity that you want to build, so that when you actually have a message that you really want to influence people about, they're really open and willing to hear.
But how do you know what they're saying behind the back?
You don't. But if you've built up enough of these things, you're hoping that you can get to a place where that message, and you can also back channel your secret people to see what people are saying. So yeah, next slide. Me? You?
You.
Me. OK. So the second half of our exercise is something that we want to apply competence and trustworthiness to some of the stickies that you talked about here. So what I'd love for you guys to do is draw a line down your poster, title one side competence, one side trustworthiness, share your stickies, and actually as a group figure out which column they go into. And maybe they actually don't fall into a column nicely. That's OK too. But let's see if some of them fall into them completely. And then also, don't forget, we'd like for you to discuss all the instructions. I used to be a high school chemistry teacher too, so all the instructions before you get started. So let's see, as you sort of separate your stickies into columns. And again, they might not fit so nicely into a column, and that's okay, and it's good room for discussion. Do you see any themes? Do they fall in between? Where's the bulk of your table stickies? And let's sort of have a discussion about the outcomes of the stickies that you guys created. Now go.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good on time. We're really good on time. Really good on time.
Oh, good. So go around, share your stickies, and figure out what column they belong.
Personal touch. Not meaning physically.
Yeah.
She said noodles, and I like noodles. So, but is that section? Is that?
I would follow on competence because she knows a certain skill. It's about the thing as opposed to her as the character. Yeah. Actually, I love noodles too.
There's no right or wrong.
Good job. Go tables.
Yeah.
You get girls together, you get excitement and enthusiasm and passionate.
Conviction. Awesome.
Do we get a gold star?
Yes.
On time.
Almost never. There's usually one side that's filtered that's heavier than the other.
Yeah. One line and it's a straight line.
I think it's tough, right? I think a lot of these kind of fall with the middle confidence, you know, that.
So we're gonna debrief, and then each table's gonna volunteer to talk.
We're agile, that's what this is.
Because of that personal experience that you saw something good happening. That's kind of like your borrowed experience, right?
I just came over with this. Yeah. I think Tana was when you go by yourself in Winter Park. I think Winter Park is right over there. Yeah.
Get started. I think conversations kind of went in.
Yeah, we're dying. Yeah, most people are finishing up already. Yeah.
I think we should get started. I think we should go. Is it you? Me? Oh.
For 5 days.
Yeah, okay.
We're gonna get all the homework.
All right, fantastic. It looks like our conversation is kind of slowing down here. If you can hear my voice, please raise your hand.
What? Yes?
You can raise your voice. If you can hear my voice, please raise your hand. Thank you. So I'd love to go around to each table and share about some themes that you had heard about at your table and or some learnings that you heard. Maybe which side had more.
Excitement.
Yeah, maybe which side had more or some interesting sort of nuggets of conversation. Did you guys want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
We had everybody said that their partner showed excitement in their conversation when what they were trying to do.
Energy, enthusiasm, eye contact. Good. Other tables? Yes, in the back.
When we originally started this, I really felt like trust was going to be the highest section for it to look at, and really it was more confidence. Like we were more interested in the confidence of the restaurants versus trusting somebody's thoughts. So I thought that was interesting.
What were some of the notes that you guys had for competent?
It was the types of food. So when people were talking about specific types of food, I think we kind of just took our own perspectives and our own feelings towards that type of food. So as soon as she mentioned Thai, I didn't care if it was good or not. I wanted to try it. Because I've never had that experience with Thai food.
On our description of how it's prepared or the detailed knowledge of the food that we're going to go try was fairly prevalent amongst all of us.
It sounds like a lot of direct experience then in that case, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't go down to that level of detail.
For our team, we are kind of equally divided on both sides, trustworthiness and competence. Well, on the trustworthiness, the common theme is like we don't know each other, but we connect very quickly through eye contact, with smile. And on the competence side, when people give you detailed descriptions of things, it builds the trust.
So it sounds like you guys started with trustworthiness and then kind of quickly evolved to competency.
I think something that was a challenge for us in this exercise was drawing a line between what was said and who was saying it. And I think we kind of focused more on what was said and where does that fall.
Yeah.
And trying to step back from that was a challenge.
For us, it was competency equaled knowledge and experience, and trustworthiness equaled delivery, how you delivered the tone, the enthusiasm.
And you guys had exactly half-half, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
12 stickers on each.
Wow.
And it was one topic kind of over table tacos.
Taco. Is it a specific kind of taco? Is it Torchy's taco? Yeah. Is it Torchy's tacos? How about tables in the back?
We had some that were split down the middle.
Yeah.
And those were on the theme of like passion, excitement, and confidence. And we felt like it was right there that was making us lean on both sides. But we did see like things that were more like data driven, like comparing the one that they like to others that are similar.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of a common theme on the confidence side.
Yeah, and sometimes actually that you mentioned data, because a lot of the C-level folks love data, right? And so you can try to influence as much as you want, but unless you can prove them otherwise, you know, they're not going to be convinced. So sometimes you have to get industry data, whether it's case studies or whatnot, to prove to them, hey, X company did this, and this is the results they got, right? And so to do a little research, and then it becomes, you know, it validates that, you know, you become a stronger influencer by leveraging the competency skills and with the data, right?
What about the team in the back?
Everything we all said. I'm like, oh yes, that makes sense, and that
I think an interesting thing as we think about competency and trustworthiness, and these two tables touched on it, is for the purpose of sort of academia and theory, we've sort of separated them into two categories, but really it's both the message and the person, right? It's both of them together, and sometimes it's hard to separate them. You know, for the purpose of this exercise, we've tried to separate that into two, but it's hard sometimes because it's both. It's both the message and the person who's sharing the message that gets intertwined, that are both together powerful for influence.
So I think one builds on the other.
Yeah.
You build on the person, you can't be trusted right away, but we have to build the confidence. You show them that you have the knowledge and the data, and then that gives you the trust.
Yeah.
Right. And then in the future, then you go with both.
Yeah. All right.
All right, how many of you guys have seen this before? Wow, not many. So this is borrowing experience, right? From Stephen Cuddy. Came from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about circles of influences and circles of concerns. So if you look at this, right, from a proactive approach, you can see the circle of influence is actually bigger than your circle of concerns. But if you're actually reactive, your circle of influence is much smaller, your circles of concerns a lot bigger. So what he explains is the circle of concerns are things outside of your control, right? I mean, Alison Levine said, I took a picture of it actually. Her circle of concerns is we cannot control the environment, right? We can only control our reaction. So we can control our reaction is by focusing on the circle of influence, right? The environmental stuff is the circle of concerns. Things you can't do about, and things you shouldn't be even worrying about, right? So if you take the proactive approach, whether it's you know, within your little circle, right? Of, let's say from a peer perspective, or from your immediate Scrum teams, if you're a Scrum Master or a product owner, or whatever the case is, try to influence them to do a certain practice, right? Whether it's, you know, can we try out test-driven development or pair programming? You know, you don't have to worry about the other 20 other teams in their organizations. Let's just focus on our little circle of influence. You can influence them, you can start building momentum, right? And then as they realize, other teams see that, oh, they're doing TDD. Is that something that can we try too? The other teams are actually seeing that, benefits of some of that. So your circle of influence becomes a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So focusing on this, being proactive to grow your circle of influence rather than reactive, right? And focusing too much on your circle of concerns. Does it make sense? So think about what is that you guys are doing now that are your circle of influences, and things that are that you are doing now that you can eliminate of your circle of concerns, right? Start self-reflecting as you're going through this day, and think about, are you effective in these areas, and what ways you can do to improve your circle of influence.
So we're at the end of our session here. I wanted to quickly summarize some things that we've talked about here. You guys are actually much better at influencing than you might imagine, right? We think about work and what we're trying to accomplish, and influence seems really hard. But even in the examples of this short activity of trying to influence your partner, especially if I was at that tortillas taco table, I would probably be influenced. And I encourage you to think that you're actually much better influencers than you think. And thinking about what are the components and how to build on that to apply that influence in the workplace. So increase your competence, think about your own personal excitement about the topic that you want. Are you sure that that's actually what you want to really push forward? Building your trustworthiness, and above all, none of these actually require budget, money, or title, and all these things that you guys can accomplish together. And that's it.
So one last question before you guys go. Who are influencers in this room? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to go be a YouTuber, but
So
questions?
here's